Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On today's episode, Dr. Shannan Palma joins us in the first part of a two-part conversation to discuss improving the well-being of autistic people and how everything we are taught about gender and sexuality are wrong. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Dr. Palma, thanks so much for joining me here today on Autism Stories.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start off by learning, where does your story in the autistic community begin?
Well, there's like touch points throughout my life, I think, but my official diagnosis and official diagnostic story began last year. 2 years ago, 2022. I had just gotten an anxiety diagnosis and started getting like medication for anxiety. And it was the first time I'd ever realized like not everyone lived. Like worried about and overthinking every single that I actually was doing something that was like medically treatable. You didn't have to feel that way. And once I started getting my anxiety under control, then I was like, well, I am very confused because I don't think anything in my life is particularly bad. It's the best it's ever been. So why is my anxiety so like at such heights that I'm seeking medication for it? Like, I don't understand what's happening. So I was reading a lot of books with neurodivergent characters. My nieces had been diagnosed with ADHD. And I was like, I don't think they're doing anything strange. Like, I was just getting very confused and curious. So I was also like edging burnout. And I knew what burnout felt like. I'd been in burnout before. And I was like, I cannot do this. I can't tip over the edge. I need some kind of help. So I was reading just lots of novels and things with neurodivergent characters. And I read Helen Huang's The Kissing Quotient, which is a romance novel with the heroine has an Asperger's diagnosis and the author also Asperger's diagnosis. And I was reading it and I was like, wait, what's happening? I don't understand. So I'm reading this book and I was seeing emotional processing through logic. I was seeing like the female character tries to figure out if the male character is in love with her. And so she decides based on the data, men stop buying their own underwear when they're in a relationship with a partner. So she buys him fancy underwear and gives it to him as a present because that's going to be the test to see if he loves her, because if he loves her, then he'll wear them. And if he doesn't, then he won't. So it's nothing about words or interactions. It's just like, well, according to the data, this is a thing that happens. And I was like, okay, I actually make decisions about whether people feel a certain way in a very similar way. And I had never seen that in anyone else. And I was feeling very both seen and also like realizing how ridiculous it is. And then there was also a moment in the book where the characters are getting physical with each other and she experiences a kind of brain body disconnect and a freeze response. And I was like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I totally do that too. Like, I don't like being touched by strangers. Like, I don't care how attractive they are. I am going to think they're trying to kill me. Like, that's how my body is going to react. And I have a PhD in women, gender, and sexuality studies. So I've studied sexuality is one of my special interests, human sexuality. So like, I was like, oh, that, I haven't seen that. How does that relate to autism? Because I'd seen things about like trauma responses and I was like, I don't have a trauma response. Like, that's not what's happening. So I started doing research. I went down the autism rabbit hole. I took 8 or 9 psychological assessments, clinically validated psychological assessments on embraceautism.com. I started watching YouTube and looking for people that seemed like they really knew what they were talking about and reading books by autistic people and women in particular. And I was like, oh God, how did we miss this? And quickly realized, first self-diagnosed and was like, okay, I'm definitely autistic and most likely autistic and ADHD. And then went through a formal diagnostic process. And I brought 37 pages of documentation, like I had written data points from my life. I gave that to the clinician before we even started. And I gave it to my therapist too. And I was like, what do you think? Should I get diagnosed? And she was like, this is going to be a very easy assessment. So, okay. I wanted to know the answer before I did it. So that was the diagnostic experience. But in reality, my cousin was diagnosed when we were little. And I was always very curious as to why he was diagnosed with something and I wasn't. And the answer was that I was smart. So all of my quirks were that I was smart. And I was like, well, he's smart too. I don't understand, but he was a boy. And they didn't diagnose girls, especially girls who kind of gifted stamp. If we go back that way, I was telling other kids my brain was different in like 5th or 6th grade and drawing out diagrams for how their thinking was linear and mine was more of a web. And I knew I thought in patterns. I knew that was different. And I had done all these like things over the course of my life and I just didn't tell people that I was doing them. But like I learned rhythms of speech from Gilmore Girls and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I didn't know what to do when I got really, really upset and scared in my 20s. So I sat in the bathtub with all my clothes on because I had watched Say Anything, and the dad in Say Anything, when his life was falling apart, sat in the bathtub with all his clothes on. So I thought, okay, I guess that's what I'm supposed to do. So I sat in the bathtub. I was like, well, I definitely don't feel better. This seems to be the place to be. Okay, at least I'm in hiding. But I wasn't doing those things because I intrinsically, like, I had an intrinsic desire to do them. I was doing them because I'd seen them on TV or I'd read about them in books. And I was trying to take care of whatever my emotional or physical need was through mimicry. I mean, that's the main piece of it. I had also had some professional experiences that made no sense to me. Like a lot of things just made no sense until I put this lens on them. And then I had a very, very dehumanizing diagnostic experience. It was pretty bad. And as soon as the diagnostician realized, like, decided for himself that I was autistic, he stopped seeing me as a person or at least stopped treating me like a person and started treating me like kind of a shiny toy. Yeah, he stopped treating me like a person. And it was difficult. And that kind of also was my point of radicalization, because as I immersed myself in listening to autistic people and being in autistic spaces, I realized that there was no support for adults and that there were a lot of us who were undiagnosed or late diagnosed, and that, like, as a general rule, most of us were struggling and needed support that wasn't going to happen.
In doing research to interview all the great guests I have the opportunity to talk to here on Autism Stories, I never know what I'm going to come across, what experiences they might have. And when researching you, I learned that you not only went to Ohio State like I did, but apparently we were both freshmen the same year. So looking back at your OSU experience, if you knew back then you were autistic, I've thought about this a lot for myself. How would your Ohio State experience have changed? How might your freshman experience been different?
Gosh, I lived at home through college because I was like, we had moved a lot, and I was like, I can't do more change. And my mom was pushing me to apply for scholarships to different places, and I was like, I'm going to Ohio State. I am living in the basement. Stop talking. And I worked 3 jobs, often simultaneously, throughout college. I don't remember college. I was so burnt out. I have 3 memories of that 4 years that have to do with actual college. I remember falling asleep in my yoga class. I remember that I got invited to go to some, like, out with some college people, some classmates once in 4 years. And I fell asleep in the bar. and I met my co-founder for the Autistic Self-Reliance Support Network, which is my one like long-lasting college friend. She was the office manager in the writing center. Like, she wasn't a student, but we took a creative writing class together, and she was like the only person that I had met. I'd met one other person in all 4 years that I still would like recall as a friend, and she transferred after our freshman year. But Lorian was like my college friend, and she was staff. So I would say one of the things I would, like, looking back, if I had known, I would have understood why I couldn't have any thoughts for years. And I thought I had lactose intolerance because I had all these GI issues. And I had a stomach ache and a headache for the entire time. And it was pretty miserable, actually. Like, I was like, I don't know why people like college. College sucks. I loved the learning, but that's one of those places where, looking back, I can see I was leveraging my ADHD against my autism. You know, I can be hyper focused and super, like, there was a routine of going to class and going to work, and I could do those things. I could follow the steps, but following those steps was all I could do. So I didn't participate in activities. I didn't make friends for the most part, other than Lorian. Once I had Lorian, I didn't need any other friends. And of course, later we realized Lorian was also autistic, and all of the people that she introduced me to were neurodivergent. So I did end up with a good circle by my mid-20s, but that was more luck than anything else. So, I mean, I would have given myself more grace. I would have given myself the chance to rest. I would have asked for help. I thought I was constantly hiding the fact that I struggled to process things in real time, and giving answers that, like, I could lean on my intellect and just kind of shut off the rest of myself. And so that was my college experience, was basically I was operating on reserve power. Like, we probably passed at some point on campus, even as big as OSU is, we probably walked past each other. I wouldn't have seen you because I didn't see anybody. I was just get from point A to point B, be there. Okay, point C, be there, point D, like, and sleep, start over. I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more if I'd realized I was autistic. I would have made different choices.
I must say I'm devastated to learn that Ohio State had a yoga class back then, and I could have gotten college credits to take it. That is that's making me very sad at the moment. But I'm going to move on from that. And following your diagnosis of learning you're autistic and ADHD in your mid-40s, you co-founded, you mentioned this, the Autistic Self-Reliance Support Network, which is an autistic-led nonprofit focused on improving the well-being of autistic people. So often as autistic adults, we're taught things that really aren't helpful to us. So I'm wondering, as someone as educated as you, what's your perspective on why you think things that aren't helpful to us are being taught so often?
This is interesting because this is actually what I decided to study and why I got my PhD. I was interested in how and why people became invested in stories, symbols, and ideas that are not in our own best interest. So I didn't understand it, but I was taking all these classes on cognition and memory and learning about trauma and learning about all of these different things because I was trying to figure out neurotypical people. And I was like, what are they doing? Because it's not reality that they're operating in something that doesn't seem to me to be reality. What is happening? So I have lots of theories about that. But, the people who make assumptions about social norms and generalizability are also the people who create generalizable standards, right? So they're the ones that are, and I say this as a curriculum developer in my day job, that the way that I work to design curriculum tends to be the opposite of how I see a lot of other curricula, right? So other forms of teaching, because we are centering neurodivergent learning styles. And also, I'm designing curricula for computer science, which is bottom-up processing. So it works very well for brains like ours. But I think it's just impossible for neurotypical brains to believe or understand fully that we are experiencing different versions of the world. When I realized I was studying top-down processing for like 18, I don't know, however many years, and had all these theories about like the thought bubbles that surround, or the kind of conceptual bubbles that surround certain kinds of minds where they can't conceive of anything that's outside of their system of thought. And when I understood bottom-up processing and autistic thinking, I began to realize that top-down processors suffer from specificity blindness. They have their own disability. In the same way that it can be hard for brains like ours to generalize, it's very hard for brains like theirs to see difference. So they see difference as pathology or disorder, right? And theory of mind, which is this thing that it's like the psychological theory, cognition theory, that empathy is this stage in brain development where your little kid brain looks at someone else and projects your experience onto theirs, uses your experience to understand their experience. That's theory of mind, right? Except theory of mind is not empathy. Like, that's the thing they're saying autistic people don't have, which has been disproved. But still, like, that's not empathy, that's projection. That's like an entirely different thing. That's taking your experiences and projecting them onto someone else. That's not accepting that that person is different from you. And what you need to do is take their experiences and think through, what would somebody with their experiences feel about this? That's actual empathy. So I think that part of it is I had to design lessons on empathy, and I did it from a bottom-up processing way. So I'm teaching empathy through computer science, and I'm teaching it as like logic trees and algorithms. I'm like, okay, this person has had X, Y. If X, Y, Z are true, then what are the likely responses? An example of this would be like, I just became a parent for the first time. And I've been very clear that I don't want to be a mom because I do not want the social rules for moms. Like, I'm going to be an awful failure at that. I want the social rules for a straight single dad. That's what I want. And I keep encountering, I present as female, and so people look at me and they think mom, and I have these kids that are 9 and 10 that all of a sudden I'm raising. And I keep telling the people I encounter at school, I'm like, I don't know mom culture, so please don't, like, if I say something wrong or do something wrong, please just tell me. I don't mean anything by it. And they keep looking at me like I'm crazy. So they're assuming that everybody parents the same way, that everyone whose gender presentation is female is going to just like know how to mom, and that momming is some kind of innate physiological instinct. It is, I don't have it. And so they're just projecting that assumption, like the way they have all their cultural training projected onto everyone else as instinct or as natural. And then if you are somebody who actually sees the social rules and has to learn them manually, then you see all the contradictions in them. So you can't just absorb them and think that they're real, because you are seeing all the specificity. You're seeing all of the contradictions and challenges. And I think that's the disjunct between what we're taught and what we experience. Like, the people making the curriculum or the people who are kind of deciding what's normal development or whatever are often people who can't see the trees for the forest. And we're people who can't necessarily see the forest for the trees. And we need to do both. But there's a lot of training, there's a lot of very specific training and conditioning for autistic people to learn to see the forest, even though the forest makes no sense. Like, the forest is made up of trees. So we're supposed to ignore what we see and just learn the concept. There's not that same training for holistic people, not in the same kind of like daily cultural, like parents teaching you, teachers teaching you, everyone driving you towards seeing the trees instead of the forest. So I think that we can be actually better equipped to navigate the world when we learn both. Did I answer your question?
Yes, very well.
Okay.
You did. Yes. We always love hearing from you, and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode on what social rules do you think are absolutely bogus. We'd also like to thank Dr. Palma so much for the conversation, and to learn about Dr. Palma, please check out the link in the podcast description of this episode. Here at Autism Personal Coach, our clients are the experts, our coaches are the guides. The majority of supports for autistics are not helpful. They try to fix us, not support us. That's why many are confused when we say our clients are the experts, experts of their lived experience. Our clients are the experts for what has worked for them and about the things they need and want in their lives. Our coaches first listen to our clients and then ask thoughtful questions, offer resources, and strategize with our clients so they can get what they need to thrive. Would you want a guide in your life to coach you to get you the things you desire? If so, then visit autismpersonalcoach.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism Stories, and if you did, if you could tell a friend, foe, or anyone you know about it so they could have the same enjoyable and educational experience as you when listening to Autism Stories, it would be very much appreciated. Till next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.